Hello, friends of YouTube. Welcome back to Mike Reads the World. Today we're continuing with the Halloween set list, as I call it, with the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in what is now modern-day Iraq, is where the tablets of the standard Babylonian edition, which is the main part of this, were found. Uh, and we're putting a date on it of 1800 BC. And this might be a surprising choice for Halloween, but let's think about it a moment. I may have misled you a little bit by saying we're just going to look at some fun, spooky folk tales, because really, the oldest surviving story of humanity, the main theme of it is about struggling with our mortality and death itself. And this is, of course, a serious topic. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be depending on your outlook on life, but I treat it certainly as a spiritual read in the most, in not just a literary sense, but truly, like, this is humanity's only oldest story. Um, and it's as somebody who I guess considers myself agnostic or still searching in many ways. Although obviously I feel pretty certain I'm not going to be punished if I happen to perish while still searching. Uh, this book really is as close to a spiritual experience as it gets for me at this time in my life. That being said, I will say this video is going to get into some intense topics, like put aside not safe for work topics. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying if you're not in the mood to think about your own mortality and like intense what am I doing with my life kind of thing, this is my warning. I may talk about that and even such intense things like free will, politics, and the like. Maybe. I might not go into politics or free will. But yeah, so let's move on. The connection with Halloween, if you look back at the pagan origins of Halloween, we're talking like, you know, the preoccupation of the the of people with the afterlife and spirits, and a lot of rituals have to do with warding away evil spirits or making sure that the spirits of loved ones are not angry after their death. And there's a lot of these kinds of rituals and ideas throughout the world. Um, and so, yes, as I said, with Gilgamesh, the best thing the best way I can talk about this, because this is an incredibly difficult video to do in many respects. This is a way overly long introduction, I'm aware, but it's necessary. It's it's so hard to grapple with. I even wrote an outline, which I almost never do for these videos, and not only have I read it over very carefully in multiple parts multiple times, I've also listened to it about three different times while working, and I've really delved into this one, um, and just going kind of chapter by chapter, or sort of part by part of the story, I think is going to be the best way I can talk about what all the different connections my brain was trying to make or making, and not all of them are going to be good, but like, I'll just say, if you want to read the Epic of Gilgamesh and you don't really know the story, it is really great to experience it without knowing the story. So I will give you this opportunity to read it yourself first before watching this video, because I'm really just gonna spoil the entire story and talk about what I thought about. But how spoilers on a 3,000 4,000 200-year-old story plus, or whatever it is. Yeah, it is what it is, right? So at any time, if you want to just experience this without more spoilers, please go ahead. So, in the beginning, Gilgamesh. This story, in a way, if I can talk, is an overarching theme, or an overarching way to describe it. Humanity's first story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is a subversion of the power fantasy. And it's very significant to me that this is the oldest story. Now, we begin with descriptions of the city of Uruk, where Gilgamesh is king. Gilgamesh is kind of abusing his power as king. He sleeps with all brides before they are wed in the city. He takes all men from their homes, I assume for war is what they're referring to. He's just this very dominating figure who seeks this all-encompassing power over his people and exercises it. And this is kind of sets Gilgamesh up as a difficult figure to like, and this is intentional. The people of Uruk are very against this, and they appeal to the gods. They ask the gods, like, please help us get rid of this king, this Gilgamesh. Bring someone in who's his match, who can teach him humility, or at the very least distract him. And so the gods create Enkidu. And now this was something where, as I was reading Pedro Paramo, which has been one of my favorite books in this entire Reading the World series, and one of my favorite books of all time, certainly a top 10, probably a top 5. I had to consider the possibility that Pedro Paramo was a kind of Epic of Gilgamesh retold, because it was during reading Pedro Paramo that I first really kind of heard what the story of Epic of Gilgamesh was. Think about it. So Pedro Paramo is kind of this man who is having his way with the people of his village, doing what he wants. In a way, Miguel Paramo is kind of his counterpart sent by the gods to keep him company, but this all, of course, goes tragically wrong. And after Miguel Paramo dies in that book, it's kind of the comparisons start to fall apart. But now that I reflect on it, the differences between the two books are as interesting as the few similarities or the connections that I found. And I suppose it's kind of like a little bit of that monomyth type thinking, that every story is really the same story retold, but with variations or with subversions. Pedro Paramo is, you could look at it as the story of Gilgamesh's illegitimate children and the women kind of whose I suppose whose life he kind of stole by sleeping with them before their weddings or something like that. And it's it's a tough comparison, but I don't know why I can't get the connection between those two books out of my head. And in the future, I'm going to have to better resolve why I see such a connection between the Epic of Gilgamesh and Pedro Paramo. Like, I just feel the same sort of like epic timelessness to both of them. The sort of hero is also the greatest hero of the story is also the greatest monster of the story. And that thematic alone is, I think, quite an old motif in myths and things like that. So this is just trying to understand the character of Gilgamesh. Now, when Enkidu comes in, I've on multiple re-listens, after reading it the first time and then listening to it multiple times, I have the sense that Enkidu is actually Gilgamesh's shadow. And this comes in where I really can't help but see this story as an allegory for civilization. And I also want to say, I don't know how much of what I'm saying in this video is original. I have listened to several podcasts or things where like professors talk about this, and even the author of this edition, Andrew George. I haven't even talked about the edition that I chose. This Andrew George edition is actually more of a scholarly edition, and it tells you which parts, of the tablets are kind of broken, and scholars have had to sort of fill in what they think is being said, and it also identifies where they're more certain of what is being said and where they're less certain. So it's very helpful. Some people will recommend the Mitchell edition of this book because it fills those gaps in seamlessly and just tells it as a story while sticking as close to the truth of the story as we know. So it's really up to you. I personally would have been bothered not knowing what is historically 100% certain and what is fabricate or like having to stitch things together. So I needed to read it this way. Um, Although I would like to experience the Mitchell edition at some point, but some people would prefer to just read it as a story and then find out which parts are stitched in and which parts are certain themselves. That's up to you. So with that brief aside, yeah, so I've listened to Andrew George talk about it. I've listened to several people talk about these books, but everything I'm saying in this video is not like it's not stolen from somewhere else. It is just literally what came to my mind. And if it is copied from somewhere, or if somebody else had the idea first, which I'm sure is very possible, it's unintentional. But yeah, so the metaphor of civilization in the whole book, Gilgamesh represents Uruk, the civilized urban city of 60,000 some people. And Enkidu represents the wild man, the barbarian, kind of our instinctual selves. Enkidu is introduced and lured to the city of Uruk by a prostitute with whom he has 7 days and nights of constant enjoyment, and he really represents that sort of like id part of the self, or the instinctual, the limbic system, however you want to say that, right? So, and Gilgamesh represents more of this, like, Gilgamesh as well sleeps with all the women in the city, but it's a structure of power. It's more about maintaining dominance over the city, perhaps, rather than just this pure gratification. Although that could be argued, I suppose. Like, if we compare to Pedro Paramo, I feel like Pedro Paramo is definitely painted as a figure that while he maintains the appearance of being the figurehead of civilization of the village of Komala. He is actually driven by more primal instincts and lets those instincts guide him, and that is shown as well. And Miguel Paramo is like Enkidu in the sense that he doesn't even have that front. He's just this totally reckless, primal type of character. So there is actually, I can continue that comparison a little bit there. But then the civilization metaphor goes even further in the quote-unquote monsters that Gilgamesh and Enkidu go out to face together. The first being Humbaba, the guardian of the forest. Now, this guardian of the forest is a divine being, and they also fight the Bull of Heaven, which is also a divine being. Now, let's look at those two. The guardian of the forest, they defeat him, and there's this strange 3-page section where Humbaba is like just begging for mercy, and it makes him seem like pathetic and like you feel sorry for them, but they mercilessly kill him so that they can start to chop down the trees, this forest. And they try to hide this from the gods because they know the gods would not like this. So they this I mean, it's just a clear metaphor for how civilization, has to be built on the destruction of the divine or the natural state of the world. But at the same time, the gods aren't necessarily painted as morally perfect either. There's this whole situation with the god and the bull of heaven. This goddess that is rejected by Gilgamesh to be married, and she gets the bull of heaven sent to punish him, and so the gods and goddesses are also displayed as being forces of nature. And the reason Gilgamesh rejects this goddess is because she represents, she's destroyed a lot of her other lovers in ways of like natural forces, right? So it shows how natural forces are can betray humanity, and so there are plenty of reasons why humanity would want to build civilization. Yet we must destroy these defenseless divine figures to do so. And this merciless killing of Humbaba, the guardian of the forest, which represents, like lumber, and then you have the bull of heaven, which obviously represents like livestock or pasture, and then um, you have later the stone men, which Gilgamesh faces alone, and it's like that could be mining. I don't know. That's me totally going off on something that's probably not even. There's probably nothing to that, honestly. But I don't know. It's kind of cool, the way I look at it. But so anyway, this made me think of in some ways how and I'm going to talk about video games as well. So there's a few video games that, like, to me, really subverted the typical power fantasy that video games give you. And one of the ways they've done that, look at Shadow of Colossus and Dark Souls, are both video games in which you kind of feel bad for defeating some of the bosses, because they're just guardians of like these powerful souls or objects, like metaphysical objects that you're going in there and destroying just to obtain power. Very much like Gilgamesh, right? These games um, turn you into a sort of merciless killer, but are aware of what they're doing and how that should make you feel. You feel bad sincerely for destroying like a giant wolf or these sort of like giant creatures that can't even really fight back. You just have to climb up them and hope you don't fall in Shadow of the Colossus and things like that. And it's all about just gaining power for yourself or a selfish purpose in those games. So, um, and there's going to be another connection back to that when I get to the end. Actually, I'm kind of going right into that, because this is when, after defeating the Bull of Heaven, when Enkidu dies, he's kind of punished by the gods. It's like the barbarian man, the shadow of Gilgamesh, must die for civilization to continue progressing. So by killing the Bull of Heaven, now the barbarian dies because we are now civilized. And when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is absolutely crushed by this. Death is not only a representation. So Gilgamesh is not only reflecting here on how powerful death is, in the sense that it is inescapable. No amount of shouting or building monuments is going to make Enkidu or himself immortal. All must crumble. Everyone must die. And this is a reflection, well, so what is the meaning of life? How do we use our time on this earth if everything perishes? So this is the confrontation we have in Nietzsche with nihilism, which is, and I've not read Nietzsche thoroughly, at all, really. I'm just familiar with his ideas through osmosis of other things. But this sort of idea of that Humanity is in a situation where we don't have certainty as much as many people pretend to have certainty about what's beyond this life. We simply do not have that certainty. And I don't know how, it absolutely blows my mind how anyone can feel or say with 100% certainty that somebody else who is a person just like you has that answer. I am all for looking into spiritual and literary traditions for some answers about how to live a good life and what happens if you do or do not, and moral lessons. But to take that to an extent of, like, someone says they know what's up there, to me, I can't understand it, because everyone who says that is just a human being like me, right? And at most is going to live 120 years. And that's I didn't really mean to get that far into religion, but how can I help it? Um, Again, nothing against those with religious beliefs. I just personally don't understand it. um, if you're thinking about things, and if you're allowing for the fact that people have competing ideas and might all have a piece of the puzzle. In fact, this is a tangent, but there's one of the most impactful things I read when I was a kid, or when I was a child, was this Sufi poem or legend. I don't even know who wrote it, but it's that one about the elephant, where all these blind men touch the different parts of an elephant and they all think it's a different thing, and they think that that thing that they're touching is the absolute truth of what the whole thing is, but yet each one only has a part. So I suppose the closest thing I subscribe to is a kind of Gnostic spirituality or idea of God, in the sense that we are all kind of like holding, or are shards of God that have to find the truth together, right? I mean, that makes more sense to me. So with that tangent, you know what? It's not a tangent. This is all totally related. This is what literature is about. This is what this project is about. Um, but Gilgamesh, now that Enkidu has died, what do I do? He seeks immortality, and he goes to the ends of the earth. He seeks his ancestors. His ancestor. I think it's his ancestor, or is it some other king? It doesn't really matter. That's not the point here. But it's this journey to find the absolute truth that Gilgamesh goes on, and not only the absolute truth, but the absolute way to beat immortality. He seeks to overcome his own mortality because he is afraid of death, and so Enkidu's death has made him afraid of his own. That, divinity not only of civilization but of man. And so, as he goes on this journey to find the absolute, here I found the Ernesto Sabato connection. Ernesto Sabato, in his work, by going inside of himself, the journey he takes inside of himself and the part of his subconscious, he reveals in his greatest works that there is a futility, that humanity cannot achieve the absolute. And this is reflected because Gilgamesh, by going to the end of the earth, and going through the dark, after he comes across the Scorpion Guardians, who I always get the sense that Gilgamesh never could have defeated in combat, but they let him pass regardless. There is a repetitive part of this poem that I found incredibly effective, and one of the most powerful moments of the entire work. When he passes the Scorpion men, Gilgamesh heard these words, what the Scorpion man told him. He took to heart. He took the path of the sun god. At one double hour, the darkness was dense, and light there was none. It did not allow him to see behind him. At two double hours, the darkness was dense, and light there was none. It did not allow him to see behind him. At 3 double hours, the darkness was dense, and light there was none. It did not allow him to see behind him. At 4 double hours, same thing. At 5 double, that's on reaching 6 double hours. 7 double hours, 8 double hours, 9 double hours. The north wind, his face. The darkness was dense, and light there was none. It did not allow him to see behind him. On reaching 10 double hours, was very near. On reaching 11 double hours, a journey remained of 1 double hour. At 12 double hours, Gilgamesh emerged ahead of the sun. There was brilliance. He comes across a strange landscape, like crystals are mentioned, a crystal landscape. There's a tavern at the end of the world, a restaurant at the end of the world, just like in, was that Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I guess, at the end of the universe, right? Um, so he stops at this tavern, and then he takes his rest, and he finally, rows across some waters after defeating the stone men, gets to the end of the earth. He finds this ancient king, and the ancient king tells him of the great flood. And of course, the great flood is like, if you don't know about that going into Gilgamesh, which I knew there was a great flood reference in there, but I didn't know it was going to be this big a part of the story and this impactful when it happened. My mind was just blown, like, by the story of Noah being the ultimate climax of this journey, and that being the lore of the entire world. And it feeds into this, like, the world is just kind of restarting, like everything fell once before and it could all fall once again. And um and then when Gilgamesh recovers the flower that's supposed to return him to be a young man, where he no longer is preoccupied by death, which is like the return to the Garden of Eden, right? Who steals that flower from him as he's going back to Europe? It's a snake. And it's like the snake stealing innocence from humanity, but this time after the fact, like Satan or the snake once again stealing that humanity from us again. Or maybe this is the first time according to Gilgamesh, but it's the connection is just, it's mind blowing. And the idea that, the there are older things than the Bible here, and it's these tales that go in, that how far deep into the past does this go? This happens to be the oldest story of humanity we have, but it's like, what's before this? That was just a moment where you stop and just ponder how big it all is, and like how just fortunate we are to have this literary work so that we can reflect on the modern literary works, and what how people are now, and how they haven't even changed that much, and how the same fear that we have was shared of death, and not only of losing our loved ones and being alone, and what should we do with our lives, but that this was shared by people 4,000 years ago. I mean, it's just how I can't I can't think of a more spiritual experience than that. Not because this is a biblical or a spiritual work in itself, but because it is the connection we have. It is the one beautiful connection we have, to the whole that might be the elephants that we're all kind of blindly touching one part of. It's cheesy, but that's it. Yeah, it blows my mind. This this informs not only all excuse me, of our humanity, all of literature, but all of civilization as well. This idea that we build even though we know it will be destroyed. And Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the ancient work of China, how does it begin? Empires must rise and they must fall, or something to that effect. It begins by telling you all empires that rise will fall. And thus begins the tragedy of all these wars, all this death, all these people fighting for what they think is right, for power, for ambition, for honor, for tradition, for simply because that is what they all they know. It's all this tragedy that is going to collapse into nothingness again by the end of the novel, and none of them are going to win. What's it all for? Where in the details do you find meaning? Who is the character that you most identify with in a book like Romance of the Three Kingdoms? Where do you see yourself? It might be in one of the minor characters amidst all these other characters that you recognize in other people. And that's a beautiful way to read literature, as well as finding just a little piece of yourself in a work, but recognizing so many others' viewpoints and ideas within it. And really, every work of literature is kind of the work of one mind observing many others, right? Um, so what is important? How do we use our time? I talked about video games and how even the games like Dark Souls and Shadow of the Colossus, by the end of the game, subvert the power fantasy in the same way the Epic of Gilgamesh does, because you at the end of those you realize sort of the futility of seeking this power, this immortal power that, and even in a meta sense outside of the game, you're going to put this game down. What did this game accomplish? What did playing those games accomplish in my life? Do I want to keep playing video games? Why do I even like video games? I don't like video games like Call of Duty and things like that, where you're just like this constant mindless whatever. I guess you could do it with friends and it can be like a social event that you bond with friends over. I guess there's something to that. But like as just games where you're trying to get higher points or like grinding for something, I have zero interest in those kinds of games. Now where I'm at in my life, I will play a game only if I feel it has like a literary connection, or is like telling a profound story, or using the mechanics of the video game to to tell some kind of like story, that in the same way that literature tries to do, or tries to do something to push the genre, I guess, in ways of storytelling and interactivity and experience, and where all those three things meet. Um, and then finally, is the same question for reading: is reading all these books worth it? Is this conversation I had with myself and now sharing with you worth, all these books I've read? And some of the comparisons I've made aren't that great. Probably you can debate them, but I think that this sort of introspection for me is making me a better person, is a guiding force in my life right now. And yeah, absolutely. Is this reading project worth it? Absolutely. I sit here in awe of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I don't think there's going to be any video quite like this one, because it's the oldest story. It's the oldest story, right? And this was the time to read it. It's the humanity's greatest question with no answer, our greatest struggle. Literature is the collective struggle with our own shadow, like Gilgamesh with Enkidu, and the struggle with mortality itself. And that informs how we should live our life honestly, sincerely, and try to um, communicate and build with others, because this is what we have, and I'm not even going to get into the question of free will today. I've had enough. Thank you for watching. I hope you will continue this journey with me, and that you've enjoyed the video, as intense as some of these subjects are. And I welcome your comments and thoughts. Please don't take everything I say in this video as like this is my fixed opinion forever, because it's obviously me working out thoughts. But I do welcome any thoughts you may have, and would love to share, and be they deep or funny, whatever it is. So thank you all again, those of you who are watching and commenting on these videos. Really do appreciate it, and we'll see you next time for another work that's pretty deep, but a little bit more spooky. All right. Have a good night, day, wherever you are.